When she walked into the wrong apartment at 2 a.m. and said, "Move over," he had no idea this mistake would change everything. Jake stared at the brown cardboard boxes scattered around his new apartment. 3 weeks had passed since the breakup, and he was finally ready to start fresh. The small one-bedroom place wasn't much, but it was his. No more shared spaces, no more arguments about whose turn it was to do dishes, and definitely no more walking on eggshells around someone who had decided he wasn't worth fighting for anymore. He picked up a box labeled kitchen stuff and carried it to the counter. The apartment complex was decent enough. Clean hallways, working elevators, and neighbors who seemed to mind their own business. That was exactly what he needed right now. Peace and quiet while he figured out what came next in his life. As he unpacked his coffee maker, Jake heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Someone was coming up the stairs, and by the sound of it, they were exhausted. Heavy, dragging steps that spoke of a long, difficult day. The footsteps stopped right next door, followed by the jingle of keys and a door opening and closing. Jake had seen his neighbor a few times in passing. She was around his age, always dressed in scrubs or professional clothes, usually carrying what looked like medical textbooks, pretty but in that tired way that came from working too hard and sleeping too little. They had exchanged polite nods and the occasional good morning, but nothing more than that. He respected that. After everything he had been through, Jake understood the value of keeping to yourself. Some people were social butterflies who needed constant interaction. Others, like him right now, just wanted to exist in their own space without drama or complications. The next few days fell into a routine. Jake would leave for his job at the tech company downtown around 8 in the morning. His neighbor seemed to keep irregular hours. Sometimes he would see her leaving early in scrubs. Other times she would come home late at night looking completely drained. He learned from the mailboxes that her name was Lisa, and from the stethoscope she sometimes carried, he figured she worked at one of the nearby hospitals. Jake was settling into his new life nicely. Work was going well. He had started cooking actual meals instead of living on takeout, and he was even thinking about maybe getting a gym membership. The apartment felt more like home with each passing day, and the constant ache in his chest from the breakup was finally starting to fade. One Thursday evening, Jake was washing dishes when he heard raised voices through the thin wall that separated his apartment from Lisa's. At first, he tried to ignore it. Everyone had bad days, and the last thing he wanted was to be that nosy neighbor who listened in on private conversations. But as the minutes passed, the voices got louder. It sounded like Lisa was on the phone with someone, and she was clearly upset. Jake could make out fragments of what she was, saying something about "not my fault" and "did everything by the book and this could ruin everything." Her voice had that edge to it that came from trying not to cry while being angry at the same time. Jake found himself frozen at the sink, a half-washed plate in his hands. Should he do something? Knock on her door and ask if she was okay? But what if she was just having a private argument with a boyfriend or family member? The last thing she probably wanted was some random neighbor sticking his nose into her business. The voices continued for another 10 minutes before everything went quiet. Jake finished his dishes, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something serious had happened next door. He kept listening for any other sounds. Crying, more phone calls, anything that might give him a clue about whether Lisa was okay. Around midnight, he heard her door open and close. Footsteps went down the hall toward the stairs and then came back up about an hour later. Jake was still awake, reading in bed when he heard her return. This time the footsteps sounded different, steadier, more purposeful. Whatever crisis had happened earlier seemed to have been resolved. The next morning, Jake was surprised to find Lisa waiting by the mailboxes when he came downstairs to leave for work. She looked tired, but not as stressed as she had sounded the night before. When she saw him, she actually smiled. "Hey," she said, pulling mail from her box. "I wanted to thank you." Jake blinked, confused. "Thank me for what?" "For not knocking on my door last night. I know I was being loud, and I'm sure you heard some of that phone call. A lot of people would have come over to either complain or try to help, and honestly, I wasn't in any shape to deal with either one." Jake felt his cheeks warm slightly. "I wasn't sure if I should check on you. You sounded upset." "I was. Work stuff. Sometimes being in the medical field means dealing with situations that are completely out of your control. And last night was one of those nights. But I had to handle it myself, you know? Having a neighbor knock on the door in the middle of all that would have just made everything more complicated. I get that, Jake said, and he really did. Sometimes the best thing someone can do is just give you space to work through whatever you're dealing with. Lisa nodded, and for the first time since he had moved in, Jake saw her really look at him, not just the polite glance of passing acquaintances, but actually seeing him as a person. Exactly. Not many people understand that, especially guys. She paused, then added with a small laugh. No offense. None taken. I've learned that trying to fix other people's problems usually just makes things worse for everyone involved. Sounds like you learned that the hard way. Jake shrugged. Don't we all? They walked toward the building exit together, and Jake noticed that Lisa moved with more confidence this morning. Whatever had happened the night before, she had clearly handled it and come out stronger on the other side. Well, thanks again for being a decent human being, she said as they reached the street. It's rarer than it should be. As Jake watched her walk toward the bus stop, he realized that sometimes the best way to help someone was simply by not helping at all. His ex-girlfriend had always accused him of being distant and uninvolved, but maybe there was something to be said for knowing when to step back and let people handle their own lives. For the first time in weeks, Jake found himself smiling as he headed to work. Maybe this new apartment and this new approach to relationships with people was exactly what he needed. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's conversation with Lisa by the mailboxes. Their interactions had grown slightly more comfortable, a wave when they passed in the hallway, a quick "how was your day?" if they happened to be getting home at the same time. Jake learned that Lisa was a medical resident at City General Hospital, which explained the crazy hours and constant exhaustion he witnessed. Jake had his own struggles to deal with. The project at work was turning into a nightmare. His team leader kept changing requirements at the last minute. Deadlines were impossible, and Jake found himself staying late most nights trying to make sense of code that seemed determined to break every time he fixed something else. By the time he got home each evening, he was mentally drained and physically tired. Sleep had become elusive. Jake would lie in bed replaying the day's problems, thinking about all the things that could go wrong tomorrow, wondering if he was even cut out for this job. Some nights he managed 3 or 4 hours of rest. Other nights he just stared at the ceiling until his alarm went off. This particular Tuesday night was one of the worst. Jake had been lying awake for 2 hours, listening to the sounds of the building settling and the occasional car passing on the street below. His mind kept cycling through the same worries, the project deadline looming on Friday, the bug in the system he couldn't figure out, the growing concern that his boss was losing confidence in him. Around 2 in the morning, Jake finally started to drift off. His body was relaxing into that space between waking and sleeping when he heard a sound that made him freeze completely, the soft click of his front door opening. Jake's eyes snapped wide open. He held his breath, listening. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe it was just the building settling or someone in the hallway. But then he heard footsteps, quiet, careful steps moving through his living room. His heart started racing. Someone was in his apartment. Jake slowly reached for his phone on the nightstand, trying not to make any noise. Should he call 911? Should he confront whoever was out there? His mind was spinning through possibilities, none of them good. The footsteps moved closer to his bedroom. Jake's grip tightened on his phone, his thumb hovering over the emergency call button. Then he heard something that made him pause, a soft, tired sigh. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it in his panic. The bedroom door opened slowly. In the dim light from the street lamp outside his window, Jake saw a figure silhouetted in the doorway. Female, about medium height, wearing what looked like scrubs. As his eyes adjusted, he realized with shock that it was Lisa. She moved into the room like she belonged there, her movements slow and mechanical. Jake watched in confusion as she reached for the hem of her scrub top and started pulling it over her head. She was facing away from him, and it was clear she had no idea he was there. "Move over," she said quietly, her voice thick with exhaustion. Jake's brain finally caught up with what was happening. Lisa wasn't breaking into his apartment. She thought she was in her own bedroom. The apartments had identical layouts, and in her exhausted state, she had somehow gotten confused about which door was hers. "Lisa," Jake said softly, not wanting to startle her. She froze, her hand still holding her scrub top. Slowly, she turned, around, and Jake could see the exact moment when confusion gave way to horrified realization. Her eyes went wide and she quickly pulled her top back down. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought, this is my apartment." The door was. "Oh no, this is your place." Jake sat up carefully, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. "Hey, it's okay. You're exhausted. The apartments look exactly the same. I can't believe I was so tired. I worked a 36-hour shift and I thought I was home." Lisa's voice was shaking with embarrassment and exhaustion. "The door wasn't locked, and I just assumed." "Lisa, breathe, it's fine, you made an honest mistake." Jake slowly got out of bed, being careful to maintain distance between them. "When's the last time you slept?" She ran her hands through her hair, clearly trying to process what had just happened. "I don't know. Maybe Sunday. We had 3 emergencies come in yesterday, and then today was just..." She trailed off, swaying slightly on her feet. Jake realized she was more than just tired. She was dangerously exhausted. "Come on, let's get you some coffee and figure this out." He led her to the kitchen, turning on the small lamp instead of the overhead light so it wouldn't hurt her eyes. Lisa sat heavily in one of his chairs, looking completely mortified. "I never do things like this," she said as Jake started the coffee maker. "I'm usually so careful about everything. I check and double-check and triple-check because that's what you have to do in medicine. One mistake can cost someone their life." "But you're not at work now," Jake said gently. "You're a human being who's been pushed past her limits. When did you last eat?" Lisa thought about it for a moment. "I had some crackers around lunch yesterday." "Maybe." Jake opened his refrigerator and pulled out leftover Chinese food. He heated it up while the coffee brewed, watching Lisa out of the corner of his eye. She was sitting perfectly still, staring at her hands, clearly processing the situation. "Here," he said, placing food and coffee in front of her. "Eat something." "You don't have to take care of me," Lisa said, but she picked up the fork anyway. "I'm not taking care of you. I'm being a decent human being to another decent human being who's having a rough time." They sat in comfortable silence while Lisa ate. The color gradually returned to her face, and Jake could see her shoulders relaxing as the food and caffeine worked their magic. "Thank you," she said finally. "Not just for the food, but for handling this like an adult. A lot of guys would have made this weird or tried to take advantage of the situation." "The thought never crossed my mind," Jake said honestly. "You were clearly not yourself, and anyone with half a brain could see that." Lisa looked at him with something that might have been gratitude mixed with surprise. Most people don't have half a brain when it comes to situations like this. Most people haven't learned the hard way that respect and boundaries actually matter in relationships with other people. As the sun started to come up outside, they talked about the pressures they were both facing. Lisa shared stories about the impossible demands of medical residency, the constant fear of making a mistake that could hurt someone. Jake told her about his project struggles and the insomnia that was making everything worse. By the time Lisa felt steady enough to go back to her own apartment, something had shifted between them. The awkwardness of neighbors had been replaced by the understanding that comes from seeing someone at their most vulnerable and choosing to respond with kindness rather than judgment. Jake woke up that afternoon feeling more rested than he had in weeks, despite only getting 4 hours of sleep. The morning with Lisa had been unexpected, but somehow it had cleared his head in a way that tossing and turning all night never did. There was something about helping someone else that put his own problems into perspective. He was making lunch when he heard Lisa's door open and close. Jake found himself listening for her footsteps in the hallway, wondering if she was okay after getting some sleep. Part of him wanted to check on her, but he remembered how much he had appreciated his restraint that night 3 weeks ago. Some people needed space to process things. The next day, Jake didn't see Lisa at all. He left for work at his usual time and came home to a quiet building. Her apartment was dark when he passed by in the hallway. Maybe she was working another long shift. Or maybe she was avoiding him out of embarrassment. Jake couldn't blame her if she was. What had happened was pretty mortifying, even though it was completely innocent. By Thursday, Jake was starting to worry. He hadn't seen any signs of life from Lisa's apartment in 2 days. No sounds, no lights, no coming and going. What if something had happened to her? What if she was sick or hurt and couldn't get help? That evening, Jake was debating whether to knock on her door when he found a note slipped under his own door. His name was written on the outside in neat handwriting. Inside, the message was brief but sincere. Jake, thank you for being a decent person the other night. I know that situation could have gone very differently with someone else. I'm embarrassed about the whole thing, but I wanted you to know I appreciate how you handled it. I owe you dinner sometime. Lisa. Jake read the note twice, then smiled despite himself. At least she was okay, even if she was avoiding him. He sat down at his small kitchen table and wrote a response. Lisa, you don't owe me anything. We all have moments when we're pushed past our limits. What happened was completely understandable, and you have nothing to be embarrassed about. If you want to talk, I'm usually home after 6. If you'd rather pretend this never happened, that's fine too. Either way, you're a good neighbor and a good person. Jake. Jake slipped the note under her door and went to bed feeling like he had said what needed to be said. The next evening, Jake was surprised to hear a knock on his door. When he opened it, Lisa was standing in the hallway holding a bag of takeout food and looking nervous. I figured I should face this head-on instead of hiding like a teenager, she said. I brought Thai food. Is this a good time to have that conversation? Jake stepped back to let her in. It's a perfect time. They sat at his kitchen table with containers of pad thai and green curry between them. For a few minutes, they just ate in comfortable silence. Finally, Lisa spoke. I've been thinking about what happened, and I realize I don't know anything about you except that you're probably the most considerate person I've met in years. I don't think considerate is the right word, Jake said. I think I've just learned from making mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Jake set down his fork and thought about how to explain. I used to be the kind of person who thought I knew what other people needed better than they did. If someone was upset, I had to fix it. If someone had a problem, I had to solve it. I thought that's what caring about people meant. And now you don't? Now I know that sometimes the most caring thing you can do is step back and let people handle their own lives. My ex-girlfriend used to tell me I was emotionally distant, but really I was just trying not to be overwhelming. Lisa nodded slowly. That makes sense. In my line of work, I meet a lot of people who think they know what's best for everyone around them. Usually they're more interested in feeling helpful than actually being helpful. Exactly. The other night, when you were clearly exhausted and confused, the last thing you needed was someone making the situation more complicated or trying to turn it into something it wasn't. You could have, though, Lisa said quietly. A lot of guys would have. A lot of guys are idiots, Jake replied, which made Lisa laugh. True, but still, thank you for not being one of them. They talked for another hour, and Jake learned more about Lisa's life. She was originally from a small town upstate, the first person in her family to go to college, let alone medical school. The pressure she put on herself was enormous because she felt like she was carrying the hopes of everyone back home. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for this, she admitted. The hours are insane, the stress is constant, and I feel like I'm always one mistake away from ruining someone's life. But you love it, Jake observed. I do. Even on the worst days, when everything goes wrong and I'm so tired I can barely think straight, I love what I do. Is that crazy? No crazier than me loving to solve puzzles with computer code even when the code makes me want to throw my laptop out the window. Lisa smiled. So we're both slightly crazy people who are passionate about our work. Looks that way. As Lisa was getting ready to leave, she paused at the door. Jake, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you single? The question caught Jake off guard. Yes, are you? Yes. And I'm asking because I like talking to you and I think you're attractive, but I also know I'm in no position to date anyone right now. My schedule is insane. My stress levels are through the roof and I barely have time to take care of myself, let alone think about someone else. Jake appreciated her honesty. I get that. I'm in a similar place, actually. I'm still figuring out who I am after my last relationship ended, and I'm dealing with my own work stress. So what do we do with that information? Jake thought about it for a moment. Maybe we just see what happens? No pressure, no expectations. We're neighbors, we get along well, and we both seem to understand that life is complicated right now. I like that idea, Lisa said. Friends with the possibility of something more if the timing ever gets better. Friends with good timing potential, Jake agreed. After Lisa left, Jake realized he felt lighter than he had in months. Not because of romantic possibilities, but because he had made a real connection with someone, based on mutual respect and understanding. Whatever happened between them, he knew he had handled the situation right. For the first time since moving into the apartment, Jake fell asleep easily and slept through the night without waking up once. Sometimes the best thing you could do for your own peace of mind was simply to treat other people the way you hoped to be treated yourself. Over the next month, Jake and Lisa fell into an easy friendship that surprised them both. They would share coffee in the mornings when their schedules aligned, and Lisa would sometimes knock on Jake's door when she got home from particularly difficult shifts at the hospital. Jake found himself looking forward to these conversations more than he wanted to admit. Lisa was different from anyone Jake had dated before. She was driven, focused, and had a dry sense of humor that came out when she was tired. She would tell him stories about her medical training that were equal parts fascinating and terrifying. Jake, in turn, shared his struggles with coding problems and workplace politics. Somehow, talking about their respective challenges made both of their jobs feel more manageable. The friendship felt safe because they had both been clear about their limitations. Lisa was dedicated to her medical career above everything else, and Jake was still recovering from his previous relationship. There were no games, no hidden agendas, just two people who enjoyed each other's company and respected each other's boundaries. Then everything got complicated. It started on a Tuesday morning when Jake was leaving for work. As he locked his apartment door, he heard voices in the hallway below. One of them was familiar. His ex-girlfriend Rachel was talking to the building manager. "I know he lives here," Rachel was saying. "I just need to talk to him." "It's important." Jake's stomach dropped. He hadn't spoken to Rachel in over 2 months, not since the day she had told him she needed space to figure out what she wanted. The space had turned into a breakup when she decided what she wanted was her ex-boyfriend from college. Jake considered going back into his apartment and waiting for her to leave, but that felt cowardly. Better to face whatever this was head-on and get it over with. "Rachel," he said as he came down the stairs. She turned around, and Jake was struck by how different she looked. Her hair was shorter, she had lost weight, and there was something nervous in her expression that hadn't been there when they were together. "Jake, hi. I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" "About us. About the mistake I made." Rachel glanced at the building manager who was pretending not to listen. "Can we go somewhere private?" Against his better judgment, Jake agreed to get coffee with her. They went to the cafe down the street where they used to go on weekend mornings when they were together. Rachel ordered her usual vanilla latte, and Jake realized he had forgotten how predictable she could be. "I miss you," Rachel said without any preamble. "I miss us. Breaking up was the biggest mistake I've ever made." Jake stirred sugar into his coffee and tried to process what she was saying. "What happened with David?" "It didn't work out. It was never going to work out. I was just scared of commitment, and I thought maybe if I went back to something familiar it would be easier. But it wasn't. David and I are completely different people now than we were in college." "So you want to get back together because your backup plan didn't work?" Rachel flinched. That's not how I meant it. I want to get back together because I realized you were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away for no good reason." Jake looked at Rachel across the table and tried to feel something. Anger, hurt, hope, anything. But all he felt was a strange kind of emptiness. The person sitting across from him felt like a stranger wearing the face of someone he used to love. "Rachel, I don't think this is a good idea." "Why not? We were good together. We understood each other. We had plans." "We had your plans," Jake corrected. "I just went along with them because I thought that's what love meant. Always saying yes, always accommodating, always putting what you wanted ahead of what I needed." "That's not true, isn't it? When did you ever ask me what I wanted? When did we ever make a decision together that wasn't ultimately what you had already decided you wanted?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "I can change," she said finally. "I don't want you to change. I want you to be happy. But I also don't want to go back to a relationship where I lose myself trying to be whatever you need me to be." They talked for another hour, but Jake's mind was made up. Whatever he had felt for Rachel was gone, replaced by a clarity he hadn't expected. He walked her to her car and hugged her goodbye, genuinely wishing her well but feeling no desire to see her again. When Jake got home that evening, he found Lisa sitting on the steps outside their building. She was still in scrubs, but instead of looking tired, she looked upset. "Rough day?" Jake asked, sitting down beside her. "The worst. I think I might have messed up something really important." Lisa's voice was tight with stress. "There was this patient, an elderly man who came in with chest pain. I ran all the standard tests, everything looked normal, so I sent him home. But he came back 6 hours later with a massive heart attack. Is he okay? He's alive, but barely. And now everyone is questioning whether I missed something the first time. There's going to be a review, and if they decide I made an error in judgment..." Lisa trailed off, staring at her hands. "If they decide you made an error, what happens? It could affect my residency. It could affect my entire career." "One mistake, Jake, that's all it takes in medicine." Jake wanted to put his arm around her, wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he knew Lisa well enough to know she needed honesty, not empty reassurance. "What do you think? Do you think you missed something?" Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I've gone over every detail 100 times. The tests were normal. The symptoms were consistent with acid reflux or muscle strain. But maybe there was something subtle that I should have caught. Or maybe sometimes heart attacks happen regardless of how good the doctor is. Maybe. But telling myself that doesn't help the patient, and it doesn't help me figure out how to be better next time." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the buildings across the street. Jake found himself thinking about responsibility and blame, about the difference between making a mistake and having something bad happen despite doing everything right. "Lisa, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you think you're a good doctor?" "I try to be. That's not what I asked." "Do you think you're good at what you do?" Lisa considered the question carefully. "Yes, I think I am. I'm careful, I'm thorough, and I genuinely care about my patients. But being good doesn't mean being perfect." "Exactly. And if you're good at what you do, then you have to trust that you made the best decision you could with the information you had. Even if the outcome was bad, especially if the outcome was bad, good people take responsibility for their mistakes, but they don't take responsibility for things that are outside their control." As they talked, Jake realized that his feelings for Lisa had grown beyond friendship. Watching her struggle with this professional crisis, seeing how much she cared about doing the right thing even when it was hard, made him respect her even more. But he also realized that telling her this now, when she was dealing with something that could affect her entire future, would be selfish and unfair. Some feelings were worth waiting for the right moment to express. This was one of them. The review of Lisa's patient case took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of Lisa barely sleeping, second-guessing every decision she had made in the past month, and Jake watching helplessly as someone he cared about tore herself apart with worry. Jake found himself in an odd position. Rachel had been texting him regularly since their coffee meeting, asking if he had thought more about giving their relationship another chance. Each message felt like an interruption from a past life that no longer held any appeal for him. His feelings for Lisa had clarified things in a way he hadn't expected, not just about what he wanted in a romantic partner, but about who he had become as a person. With Rachel, Jake had always felt like he was playing a role, the agreeable boyfriend who went along with plans and avoided conflict. With Lisa, even in friendship, he felt like himself. Their conversations challenged him, made him think differently, and left him feeling energized rather than drained. But Lisa was consumed with her work crisis, and Jake knew that any conversation about feelings would have to wait. Instead, he focused on being the kind of friend she needed, someone who listened without trying to fix everything, who brought her food when she forgot to eat, and who reminded her that her worth as a person wasn't determined by one medical case. The night before Lisa's review meeting, Jake heard her pacing in her apartment. The sound went on for hours, back and forth like a caged animal. Around midnight, he heard her door open, and a few minutes later, there was a soft knock on his door. Lisa was standing in the hallway in pajamas and a robe, looking exhausted but wired. "I can't sleep," she said. "I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently." "Come in," Jake said, stepping aside. "Want some tea?" They sat on his couch with mugs of chamomile tea, and Lisa finally voiced what she had been thinking for 2 weeks. "What if I'm not cut out for this? What if I've been fooling myself about being a good doctor? Do you remember what you told me about why you wanted to be a doctor?" Jake asked. "I wanted to help people." "And have you helped people?" Yes, but no buts. Have you helped people? Lisa nodded reluctantly. Have you learned from your mistakes when you've made them? Yes. Do you care about doing the right thing even when it's hard? You know I do. Then you're exactly cut out for this. One case, Lisa. One case out of hundreds doesn't define who you are as a doctor. Lisa leaned back against the couch cushions and closed her eyes. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just looking at this situation from the outside, which means I can see things more clearly than you can right now. Jake, can I tell you something? Always. These past few months, having you as a friend, it's been the best part of an incredibly difficult time in my life. I don't know how I would have gotten through all this without someone to talk to who actually listens. Jake felt his heart speed up. Lisa, I know we said we weren't in a place for anything more than friendship. And I know my timing is terrible with everything going on at work, but I need you to know that my feelings for you have changed. The words hung in the air between them. Jake set down his tea mug and turned to face her fully. My feelings have changed too, he said quietly. Really? Really? But I want you to know that whether or not anything romantic ever happens between us, you're stuck with me as a friend. That doesn't change based on what you decide about us. Lisa smiled for the first time in weeks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Good. Now, about the other thing. What other thing? The part where we both just admitted we have feelings for each other. Lisa laughed, and Jake realized how much he had missed that sound. What do we do about that? I think we take it slow. See how things go after your review tomorrow. No pressure, no expectations, just see what happens. I'd like that. The next evening, Jake was waiting in the hallway when Lisa came home from the hospital. Her expression was unreadable as she walked up the stairs, but when she saw him, her face broke into a grin. Good news? Jake asked. The best news. They reviewed everything. My notes, the test results, the timeline of events. 3 different doctors concluded that I made the right call with the information I had. The patient's heart attack was caused by a condition that wouldn't have shown up on any of the tests I ran. There was literally no way I could have predicted it. Jake pulled her into a hug without thinking about it. Lisa hugged him back, and for a moment they just stood there in the hallway holding each other. I'm so proud of you, Jake said. Not just for being vindicated, but for how you handled these past 2 weeks. I couldn't have handled it without you. When they pulled apart, Lisa looked up at Jake with an expression he had never seen before. Hopeful, nervous, and determined all at once. Jake, would you like to go on a real date with me? Not as neighbors, not as friends, but as 2 people who want to see if this thing between us could be something special? I would love that, Jake said. But I have one condition. What's that? I get to plan it, and I promise it won't involve anyone accidentally walking into the wrong apartment. Lisa burst out laughing. Deal, but Jake? Yeah? I'm glad I walked into the wrong apartment that night. Best mistake I ever made. Jake thought about all the ways that night could have gone differently. How he could have reacted with less understanding. How Lisa could have been too embarrassed to ever speak to him again. How they might have remained nothing more than polite neighbors who nodded in the hallway. Instead, they had built something real based on mutual respect, honest communication, and the kind of timing that couldn't be forced but had to be allowed to develop naturally. I'm glad too, Jake said, taking Lisa's hand. Ready to see what happens next? With you? I'm ready for anything. As they walked toward Jake's apartment to plan their first official date, Jake realized that sometimes the best relationships started not with dramatic gestures or perfect timing, but with 2 people choosing to treat each other with kindness when kindness wasn't expected. Everything else, the attraction, the compatibility, the love, could grow from that foundation. And sometimes, if you were really lucky, it did.